Welcome to a conversation about topics that we in Klimakultur love the very most. It's sports and it's climate issues. And today we are joined by two scientists or researchers. It's Pascal Stegman and it's Manuel Suter. You have just published a very interesting article we'll get back to, but I'd like to start by getting you to introduce yourself. Would you like to start, Manuel?
Yes, thanks a lot for the invitation, Julie and Ellen. My name is Manuel Suter. I'm a researcher at Lund University in Sweden and funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation. My research focuses generally on sustainability transformations. For example, I study how communication and psychological framing shape environmentally relevant behavior, and how societies can be organized to live well within planetary boundaries.
Thank you, and welcome to you, Pascal.
Hey, thanks for having us. I'm looking forward to our chat. As you said, my name is Pascal Stegman. I'm a postdoc, a researcher in the University of Bern. I'm a sports sociologist. So basically what I'm doing is I'm looking into how society is influencing the field of sport, and apparently also vice versa, so how sports is influencing society. And that's where Manuel and I basically met and started to find out that it might be very nice and very interesting to do some work together. And here we are.
Welcome. Are you sporty people? Do you do any sports on your free time?
Yes, I love sports. I did several years competitive rowing, and now I'm more polysportive. I dance salsa and do a lot of cross-country skiing in winter. Yeah,
it's pretty much the same for me, although it was not rowing. It was ice hockey that I played on a semi-professional level. Now today I'm just enjoying myself, going for runs, for cycling, for cross-country skiing as well. Basically like that.
We'll have to set up a separate call with Pascal and Erlen, where they can discuss mountain cycling, I guess, and skiing. Would that be a dream conversation for you, Erlen?
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty good. No, it's super nice to have you guys. And we can, of course, talk a lot about the cool winter sports and summer sports, but also like diving into this topic is super interesting.
So the article you just published, I discovered it on LinkedIn, where one of you just published or put a comment and a link to it in a post about Ski Fossil Free, the campaign, I think. And it also shows how great LinkedIn is for me I do a lot of green trolling there, where I write comments on the fossil fuel industry, people posting stuff, but I also learn a lot and discover a lot of research there. The article is called Climate Action Delay Discourses in the Sports Sector, Insights from Interviews with Athletes and Staff. And we'll link to it here, of course. But let's start out by hearing, what is climate action delay discourses? And please explain the word discourses as well in this.
Well, simply put, climate action delay discourses are ways of talking about climate change that accept the problem of climate change, but they justify postponing or weakening climate action. So it's not a denial of the reality of human-caused climate change. Climate delay discourses, they can even sound reasonable on the surface, and they function to defend the status quo or just keep ambition low.
Could you give one example to start off with?
A climate discourse could, for example, be to say that there are other actors that have more power, like, for example, when we talk about countries' ambition for climate action, it's often said that, well, the states or China should act before we, as a small country, Norway, start acting, that there is more leverage that they have. Yes, and we argue that understanding prevailing discourses is relevant because they can reflect the world around us, but they can also influence and shape it.
Cool.
Pascal, what is climate action delay discourses to you? Is it the same? Did you get any surprises in your work on this article with these topics?
I think what Manuel just said pretty much describes what these discourses are. Maybe from my perspective as a sociologist, I could probably add on that these are not only individual discourses. So that's not only what Manuel would say or what any person would say to defend the status quo, but it's something that also is given or also develops within how society as a entire group of persons or of organizations is acting, and then is developing and defining what these discourses are. So that is also something we probably will touch later on, something that's very difficult to get out of and to find ways to in the end dissolve these discourses.
Yeah, I think that's a really relevant point that Pascal mentioned, that depending on the actor, organization, or sector, climate delay discourses might be different. Thus, it's also relevant to focus on the sports sector and its different actors to get a more nuanced picture of prevailing climate delay discourses in elite sport.
So would it be correct of me to say that the article is about what we also call the new climate denial, which is not opposing climate science, but is talking about climate in a way that removes the urgency and talking about climate action that is nice, but doesn't really address the major issues in the climate crisis? Would that be correct of me to?
I would say this describes it very well.
So, a question to you, Erlend. You've been looking into Norwegian sports and culture, and we have for years. And there's a lot of climate action going on, but we are not always too happy with the focus on it, are we?
No. In Norway, it's like super individualized. So instead of like approaching climate change on a systemic level, a lot of organizations and politicians and bureaucracy are working to like individualize it and don't look into the problem of fossil fuels itself and the fossil fuel companies that we have in Norway. So it's like, to the question you lay, it's that the research that you are doing, Pascal and Manuel, is fitting very well with how we see climate denial in Norway and how people are like diving into the small steps that they can do without feeling any urgency or talking about it with urgency.
So one concrete example is like our football association, who's doing a lot of work on removing plastic granulates from the football fields or the fake football fields, whatever you call it. And I saw our prime minister wrote an op-ed in one of the biggest newspapers about Norwegian climate action and mentioned this program that the Football Association is doing. And there's a lot of talk, and there's also a lot of money and programs on these kind of actions, which are good, of course. We want people to do climate action, but no one mentions the fact how the football sector is through and through oil sponsored, and how Equinor for many, many years sponsored a lot of children's and athletes in that. Getting back to you, Pascal, and Manuel, you describe in your article 5 different discourses of climate delay, and one of them is reject the need for urgency, focus on incremental measures that everyone supports. It includes a focus on technological approaches like electric cars and renewable energy solutions, and only that. Could you please elaborate on why a focus on incremental measures leads to a delay in climate action? And please explain what incremental measures means.
Well, I think that's a very relevant question. So most importantly, I would first like to mention that assessments of the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN body for assessing science related to climate change, this body emphasizes that to decrease risks and stabilize the climate, deep, rapid, and sustained emission cuts are required, and not just marginal improvements. So if the narrative is we can get there through gradual improvements, such as, have some more electric vehicles or some more EVs, it normalizes a speed that is misaligned with the remaining carbon budget and near-term reduction needs. And incrementalism is especially risky because of climate tipping points. The IPCC warns that as warming increases, the likelihood of abrupt and irreversible changes rises, and that tipping points cannot be ruled out. So what do we understand as incremental measures? As already mentioned, this could be electrifying vehicles, it could be switching to renewables, it could be collect more garbage on the ground. And all of these measures, I mean, they are needed, and they can also be easily and convincingly communicated, but often they are just not enough. We need more. And and if the conversation stays on these successful incremental steps, it avoids the discussion on whether the sector is aligning with climate targets at the required pace. By emphasizing incremental changes, such as technological fixes, the sport sector can avoid harder decisions about more transformative climate measures, such as travel and calendar reforms, or sponsor policies, or limits on growth and logistics. Furthermore, there is also empirical work showing that highlighting past pro-environmental actions can sometimes license less action later. That means that a strong focus on small steps can unintentionally make athletes and organizations feel they have earned credit, which reduces appetite for bigger and more disruptive changes.
I'd like to get you to comment on just that, the small steps, because for many, many, many years, Equinor, the state-owned Norwegian oil company, were sponsoring Norwegian cross-country skiing, and especially the youth programs. And Johannes Klæbo, who is the most winning Winter Olympian of all times, was one of the ambassadors, and he grew up in the Equinor sponsorship programs. And just before the Olympics now, he recorded a video for FIS cross country for a winter campaign they have. and where he says that his habit is to do the small, simple steps, like drive his electric car. He thinks the biggest steps we can do to keep the winters alive is to do small things, so it doesn't need to be much, just those small steps in your daily life. I think that's the best thing we can do to save the winters, Johannes Klæbo said. Pascal, how does this fit with your article and your findings there?
I think it does fit very well with what Manuel just said. It shows in the end that these are the solutions that, again, are given to these athletes. So I'm not sure if I see the issue and the fault with Johannes Klæbo itself, but it might also be something that's how they were educated in over the last years. That's what they learned, that's what they have seen, and that's what they reiterate now as climate actions that are doing enough well to protect the winters. I think it's potentially also a little bit of a country-specific differences that we can observe here between Norway and Switzerland, because in Switzerland, climate actions that really help to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, they are discussed more intensively than what they are in Norway. But you can also see in Switzerland the consequences of climate change already. You might have the image in mind of Adelboden, the giant slalom races where you have like a small track of snow. Obviously, it's artificial snow that they use and not natural snow. And then on the outskirts, it's just green. And in Norway, it might be a little bit less dramatic at the moment. And this, together with the educational path that Klæbo has undergone, might be a reason why he's arguing like that.
Let's pause a minute on the education or the training that these athletes get from the system, from the sports organizations they grew up in. Erlend, I'd like you to share. You've been interviewing a former Norwegian cross-country coach for the national team called Geir Endre Rong about this, because he was the coach of the youth national team when they went from being sponsored by Statoil, when Statoil changed their name to Equinor, and they also changed the name of our national team to Equinor's youth national cross-country team. And he has told you about how that changed the way Equinor worked with the youth athletes as well, if you'd like to share a bit of that.
Yeah, it's like Klæbo has been an ambassador for the cross-country team for years and been through the Morgendagens Helter program and
Tomorrow's Heroes program, which was Equinor's sponsorship program.
Yeah, and Geir Endre told us that when, just like Julie said, when they changed from Statoil to Equinor, they also changed their like knowledge program and try to get more in touch with the athletes and be more present in their like in the knowledge building with everyone. So they tried to connect more with the athletes, and they were very busy telling all the athletes that they are on a path to a more sustainable energy project, transforming from oil to renewables. And of course, 10 years after, we know that that's not true. They are still doing fossil fuel, their fossil fuel business, and not picking up on renewables. So it's it's been a long program where they have connected athletes directly through them through Morgendagens Helter, making them making them into ambassadors for all the young athletes coming into the sports.
And giving them access, inviting them in to do PowerPoint presentations and letting them talk about, how green they're going to be. How much of a responsibility do you guys think? Because I have a background from the music business, and we talk a lot about what musicians should, or artists, or famous people should say about climate, but we never talk so much about the music industry they're growing up in and their support systems and who are forming their opinions. So, in your research, how important do you think the sports organizations are in this?
Should I go first, Manuel? Yeah, okay. I maybe need to separate my answer. In the first part, I try to explain how it currently is, and in the second part, I try to sketch out what I think based upon what we're doing, but also based upon other researches, what it could and should be. So I try to keep it not too long. So currently the sport system is not accepting or not taking a role in being a leader, in being responsible also for what their sponsors are doing, in being responsible for what their fans are doing. So we do have, from sport events, often also accountings or carbon emission accountings that do not reflect about the fan travels. So they don't show how much greenhouse gas emissions are coming from their fans, and arguing sport is only having a minor role in contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, a delayed discourse as well. So yeah, at the moment we don't see a lot of responsibility in the sport system, which is also, and I try to explain that from what sports is doing or what sports is meant to do. It's also somehow understandable, a little bit at least, because what are all these sports organizations, these sports federations are meant to do? They aim to promote sports. They aim to promote their sports. So the skiing federation is aiming to promote skiing. Their goal is to grow, to have more people doing skiing, more people going to ski events. And that is what they first try to do. They somehow, at least the winter sports, don't totally understand that growing in their sports also is controversial or risks their own sports. That's something they somehow don't totally understand. I cannot explain why this is the case, but when you look into all these sustainability strategies or snow sports sustainability strategies, it's always first things first. It's we want that more people do our sports. So that's how it is, how it should be. I think especially elite sports and elite sports athletes, they have such a nice job in comparison to all of us. They are enjoying the crowds, they're competing for medals. I don't say that everything is nice about the job. There's also being forced on the downhill in the Olympics is not very nice, or all the training sessions they have, it's not very nice, but still in comparison, it might be some of the nicer jobs that you probably have. And from there, and from the public exposure that these athletes have, I think there is a responsibility, same as in music industry, for example, or as in the film industry, for example, that these people could or should take to help all of us, all of the others, to take actions that are actually helpful to mitigate and prevent climate change.
A question to you, Manuel. I really think, or I see that the focus in Norwegian winter sports is everyone can talk about how to produce artificial snow in a most sustainable manner, but they're not really talking about how to avoid the need for producing artificial snow. So yes, it's as you said, Pascal, it's more about adaptation to climate change than mitigation and trying to stop it. What has surprised you the most in working with these topics? Are you hopeful or?
Yeah, I am still hopeful. Maybe not optimistic. I think that's a difference. But I still think we have a window of opportunity to mitigate environmental pressures such as climate change. And well, I think what I found quite interesting in the interviews that we had with the athletes is that I feel like quite a few athletes, they don't really understand where we should focus on with mitigating climate change. So they often made wrong claims about what action has what kind of environmental impact. So, for example, they were not understanding how bad taking the plane is for the climate, or they thought that it's enough to just drive an electric car and things like this. But on the other side, it's also a little bit understandable since, I mean, as a professional athlete, you need to have full focus on your sports and you don't want to have any negative external influences. And once you realize like the reality of climate change, I think this might lead to worse sports performance, right? So you also try to protect yourself a little bit from these influences. And then it's of course easier to just like follow what organizations and companies tell them, that it's enough to focus on these technology fixes. Please, Klebo, join this campaign and promote these small steps. And they might believe, well, this is enough because they don't have the capacity to reflect more about it. And if they, as I said, if they would understand it, they might end up in a cognitive dissonance that they might not be able to resolve. So I think in a way it's also understandable, but still I think the athletes are really a lever that we have. I think the organizations, sport organizations, they might not be the one who will all of a sudden change. I think there needs to be more pressure. And I think the athletes, they could come with more pressure because eventually the elite sport system relies on athletes. And if there are more and more like role models such as Klebo who would speak up, I think this might change a lot.
Yeah, I think I follow you on all that. And then I just wanted to mention that I were in a panel with Ukalek Slettemark, that is a professional biathlete competing for Denmark, living in Grönland.
Living in Lillehammer.
Lillehammer, but she's coming from Greenland.
Yeah.
Greenland, yeah. And it was just super interesting to hear her thoughts on it because she's so outspoken about climate change and fossil fuels and so knowledgeable and interested in speaking up and out and having a voice that is super clear, reaching as many as possible. So it's quite on an opposite note than what you just said. Mm-hmm. So the athletes are obviously like they come in all kind of shapes and interests. Mm-hmm. But she also talked about like how IBU, which is the international organization for biathletes, how they are doing master classes and trying to build knowledge among biathletes on fossil fuels and climate change. So it's there are a few things happening in some organizations, I think, and a few athletes that are really speaking up and out about these topics.
And Alan, you checked out some of the educational material that the IBU has made for their athletes. And in that material, we'll link to it in the liner notes, but they talk about carbon capture as a climate solution and how that is not a proper climate, a very good climate solution, but a false solution, which I think is a big difference to Norwegian skiers, because the Norwegian Ski Association would not train their athletes in anything about carbon capture, for sure. Also, as a little fun fact, the Norwegian leader of the Cross Country Association has a background as the sponsorship boss for Equinor. So it's all closely connected. I was doing a radio debate a couple of weeks ago during the Olympics about sustainability in winter sports and the Olympics. And I was talking, among others, with one of the leaders from the Norwegian Sports Association, NIF. And the leader, I was talking about fossil fuel sponsorships of the Olympics and how that is a problem in winter sports. And she said very clearly that their focus is on reducing emissions, not to shoot down the oil industry. They have to reduce the demand for oil and to reduce the environmental footprint of sports. That's their responsibility. And she went on to talk about snowmaking, how to convert fossil energy use to renewable use when it comes to artificial snowmaking, etc. Who should influence the sports organizations? Who will they listen to? Because we often see that the consultancies these sports organizations are using are not the ones advocating for, the big systemic change IPCC says we need. So who will the sports organizations listen to? Do you have any thoughts on that, Pascal or Manuel?
I think Manuel briefly touched it before. They are going to listen to the athletes, and they're going to listen to public pressures. So, and I think that's the tension or the dilemma they're currently facing, or that we currently have. There is not enough pressure because the public, we all love sports, or we love to watch sports. We enjoy Klebo. I don't know, he won 6 gold medals or 5 gold medals. I think in every race he competed, he won a medal, at least. That's what I remember. I like to watch the Swiss ice hockey team competing at the Olympics. We all, to a certain degree at least, enjoy watching the World Cup in men's football or in women's football. So it's also a little bit our fault that we don't put more pressure on sports. And now sports would have still the chance to do it by their own. At one point, the athletes will come up with more pressures. We can see that in football already, that athletes start debating about, we can't compete in 60 games, we can't go more and more and more. So there is already or people starting to put on pressures. You have an example from I can't say her name, but the athlete from Greenland.
Ukaleq Slettemark. Yes.
It's still very difficult for me now. So there is starting to come pressure on sports, but sports is not acting at the moment. At one point, there will be top-down pressures coming or getting imposed on sports, and then they have to follow the regulations. And I feel, as unfortunate as it is, that's what really will help.
Yeah, to add here maybe, so how could there be more athletes speaking up? And what we found in our studies, there are inhibiting factors for athletes who speak up. the first thing is that they might not have like the right resources to speak up because they feel like they're not knowledgeable enough to be entitled to speak about the issue of climate change. So I think there would be fruitful collaborations between NGOs with athletes and also with the research community that helps athletes to become more knowledgeable and to become better at communicating about this issue. And another factor that we found that is inhibiting athletes to speak up is that they often believe that they already need to be acting environmentally friendly. So they feel like, well, since they are doing elite sports and they are taking the plane and so on, and they use a lot of material resources, that they are not allowed to speak up. This would be greenwashing. And I think we should also do something against this discourse narrative, because it's not true that you are not allowed to speak up about these systemic issues that we have in sports. You don't need to be sustainable to want to change something. And I think if we could change this narrative, we could also motivate a lot of athletes to be more outspoken about the issue.
Also,
sorry,
can I just shoot in on that? It's just another part of it is also like the community building among athletes. If they feel like they are part of a movement and can get support from other athletes also speaking up, it makes it easier for them to like walk with the message and go to media. And we see that a lot of, like, when a journalist asks, they usually ask a single athlete, and it becomes very, like, the whole discussion becomes very lonely for them. Like, they are the only athlete speaking up, and that's not true. So it's something a bit like, it's super important with the community building among athletes as well.
Very good point.
That's a perfect segue, or not a segue, Alan, but the Norwegian skater, Ragne Wiklund, who took 3 medals in the Olympics, she went out and said in an interview that she would not accept fossil fuel sponsorships because of her knowledge about climate change. And she also said that her biggest worry were not winter sports, but the huge consequences of climate change for the earth and everything. But the comments on that article were so hostile, and people were accusing her of how can she speak about this because she's flying to the Winter Olympics and her outfit is made of plastic, or how can she do this? And so that's an example on what you were saying, Alan, about she becomes a lonesome voice in this. And then a couple of days later, the newspaper published another interview with one of her teammates, and Bjørn Magnussen, who didn't take any medals. And he says yes to oil, and then he continues to talk about Norwegian oil as being perhaps the most climate-friendly oil out there. And it's a global problem with climate change, so it has to be solved globally. And he also mentions how these companies are in a transition phase to renewable energy. So you have a Norwegian skater in one of the biggest Norwegian mediums saying, this is basically climate disinformation, but it's not being debunked. I don't know, do you have any response to, how do you feel when you see a newspaper article like this?
I mean, there you can count the different climate delay discourses that are mentioned. I mean, only in these few sentences, there are like 3 different climate delay discourses.
Let's go through them, Manuel. Would you like to, what are the climate delay discourses?
I mean, the first thing is like, I don't think you can just turn off the tap in Norway. Demand won't drop immediately. That's basically saying change is impossible, right? I mean, there is a problem, but we cannot really change it. And then it's a holistic global problem. It's kind of whataboutism, right? I mean, as long as we do not collaborate globally, we cannot solve the problem. So we as Norway, we do not be a role model and go ahead. And then also saying climate friendly oil. I mean, climate friendly oil does just not exist. So this is pushing non-transformative climate actions, which is another climate delay discourse. And then these companies are also in the transition phase to renewable energy. That's again like incrementalism and talking about goals, but not really clear, measurable, specific actions. Yeah.
Thank you for going through this. Pascal, any comments on this?
No, it's what Manuel pretty much said. It just again reflects where these individual athletes are coming from and how they are educated in the system, which as maybe you have read the article detailed enough, also in itself is a delay discourse. So being caught in the system, we have framed that as a discourse as well. So
should we just talk a bit about sports journalism in this? Erlend, I know you've been working a bit on it, but what role does sport journalism have in what they're writing about and what focus what climate discourse they are presenting as well? Do you have any opinions on that? It doesn't matter if you haven't researched it properly. I would just love to hear your thoughts on sports journalism.
I think it could have a large influence because it's a special kind of people who are reading these kind of articles, and it's maybe not like the typical climate folks that is reading sports news articles. So if you would read more about climate issues, it would first of all reach other people, and it would also educate people to kind of see the world a bit like as more connected, right? That not sports is like a safe haven. I mean, eventually climate change affects every area of our life. And so I think it should also be included in different news categories. I think it's already a problem that if you go on a news site that there is a category climate and environment. I mean, it's not like just one area of our life. It influences every area. And that's why I think it's really important that we start to think more holistically about these issues.
Pascal, your thoughts on journalism?
I'm as you already said, I'm not the expert in media theory and mass media theory, but yeah, obviously we have media and journalists that can set the agenda for us as the public. So they definitely have control over what we read. That's obviously what we read, but also how we feel and how we think about it. So if Norwegian media allows athletes to bring forward 4 climate action delay discourses in like 4 sentences, then obviously they shape the opinion of the public of how we feel about it. When we read media, at least when we're not that much into the topic, yeah, we take it as granted because we believe what media tells us.
A small step for them maybe could be to, like, on articles like the one with Bjørn Magnussen, just have a fact box or something that just explain what is the real facts about climate change and what are the delay discourses, like just to
debunk the
it needs to be debunked immediately, because it's or else it just lives out there as a truth among people that are interested in sports.
I mean, I think that's a great idea. The question is like, are these news outlets even interested in doing this, right? I mean, we also always have to look at ownership. I mean, who is owning these media outlets? What kind of interest do they have? I mean, are there any ties to fossil fuels? That's really important. And I think then another issue, I mean, even for national news, like, I mean, for example, the Swiss national TV, I mean, they need to inform people kind of in a neutral manner. But what I often see there is that there is a little bit of a false balancing approach, right? They try to give both sides equally a stage, right? So, for example, they would give a climate scientist a stage who says, well, climate change is true. But then they would also give a climate change denier the same stage, right? And this leads to a false balancing, because in climate change, it's like it's such a huge consensus about the issue. But if like the media portrays it as like, well, both is kind of a possibility, I think it leads to a huge bias in how the public perceives these issues.
So we have seen so clear the difficulties of getting Norwegian media to write about fossil fuels and sports during the Olympics. In January, the Ski Fossil Free campaign was launched. It was a petition for addressing fossil fuel sponsorships in winter sports. It was launched in Norway by the Norwegian skier Nicolai Schirmer and the organization called Folk mot Fossilmakta, People Against Fossil Power. And it became a huge success. Global skiers supported the petition, and they collected 25,000 signatures, which Nicolai Schirmer went to Italy to deliver to the Olympic Committee. There were a lot of press from Associated Press, German media, BBC, NPR in the US, and so on, Danish radio as well. Norwegian media haven't covered hardly, and the Norwegian Broadcasting Company, which is like our BBC, NRK, the journalist there said that it wasn't a big enough news story to cover. So that says something about how hard it is in Norway to really get, the journalists are afraid of being called political or activistic if they cover these things. And they don't reflect too much on how political it is to not cover these very successful campaigns. In your article, you say that the sports sector may have an important function as a role model for climate action. Ukalek Slettemark was one of the skiers coming through this campaign and speaking out. What role do you think campaigns like Ski Fossil Free can have in mobilizing both athletes, but also the organizations to proper climate action?
Maybe I can start, and Manuel, you can add on this. I think having 25,000 signatures is already powerful. I don't know how many elite athletes we do have in ski sports, in elite ski sports. I would assume there's also in ski cross and cross country skiing, all these athletes counts. So it's already powerful.
Yes, there were. We don't know how many of the 25,000 who are professional athletes, but there were a lot of professional athletes going out and supporting the petition. So, but everyone could sign. Yeah, I have signed.
Okay. So, all right. So
I'm not a professional winter athlete.
But still, it's still a powerful initiative that also, as you said, had media attention. So it was also possible that around this, it starts to get some additional public pressure on the ski organizations. But in the end, I think it's again because there's that initiative. And if we don't comply? If the sports organization don't comply? What happens? Are these 25,000 athletes really are going to say, okay, we don't compete next year? I'm not sure if they will. It would be very consequential if they do, and it would be a massive sign to ski organizations, but I'm not sure if they will do. But what they do with the initiative, and that's the positive thing about it, they open up the space in what is discussable and what is debatable. And I think that is also something that we are trying to contribute to, because at the moment, also in sport and sustainability research, the space in which the research is undertaken is most often very narrow and very limited and focused on, as we already talked about, how can we adapt to climate change, and how can we make sure that the athletes compete in a health and safe environment. And put forward such an initiative at least opens up the space and can be a first step towards next initiatives that will help to mitigate climate change.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Pascal said. I think it's an important first step, such kind of initiatives. And I think it's really important that the demands are very specific and kind of actable. And what I would be curious, I think this might not be enough, these kind of initiatives, and I would be curious to see more kind of protest actions by athletes in the future, where they really say, like, if you do not make these changes, we do not come to this and that competition. And that builds again on what you said, Erlen, that like this community building among athletes is very important. And I think they could really back each other up with this, because if it's only individual athletes, like the negative consequences might be quite large. But if you reach a certain number of athletes who stand up together and organize themselves and would come up with such a protest, I think this might be highly influential.
Amazing. Alan, did you have a comment?
No, I think it's super interesting. And just one other takeaway from that conversation with Ukadek was that there was a lot of athletes on that call. It was organized as a Zoom call, and maybe 200 people were listening in or something. And a lot of them were athletes. And at the end of the conversation, they kind of took over the whole thing and started talking together. Like, it was super interesting to just listen in, because they have so much experience in speaking up as single athletes. And they have not had a lot of backing from their organizations or other athletes when they have been speaking up. So they were just like, it was just, it gave me a very positive vibes to just listen into them, because they are so engaged, and there are so much energy released when they are talking together and building a community. And that's, I just hope that we can help them create that community in the future.
So before we finish this, I have a science question about research and funding, because at the radio debate I attended about the Olympics and sustainability, there was a Norwegian sports researcher as well, and she was asked, what is the most important sustainability action you can take as a parent when your children is doing sports? And then she started talking about carpooling, how that was important. And I was like, yeah, so the hundreds of Norwegian local sports organizations being sponsored by fossil fuels and getting to brand the children from the age of 2. We see some, that's the youngest fossil fuel sponsored activities we see in sports for children from that young age is not considered. How, and we see it in the culture sector as well, that I think we could get a lot of funding if we worked on getting festivals to do their waste management better. But to talk about fossil fuel sponsorships is so much harder to get funding to. Is that the same in research in sports? Is that an issue at all?
It's a very good question. I think, at least I can speak now for Switzerland and for the European, a little bit for the European context. It's probably easier to get funded what already have been researched. So what is maybe not high risk, in terms of high risk that it fails and that it doesn't deliver any results. I assume this might be a little bit easier to get funded. Although when you have a very good idea that takes high risk, for example, how you can basically debunk the sports system so that it is within the planetary, or that it acts within the planetary boundaries, I could imagine that this would also be fundable. But it's then harder in the execution of the project. So how do you find a sport organization that participates in a case study that basically basically like reduces the sports to a degree that it is within planetary boundaries? I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I hope it could give you some insights.
Yeah, I think it depends a bit also on the national context, like and the kind of funding organizations you look at. I mean, there are some funding organizations that focus more on, like, for example, funding sufficiency approaches, which would be, I mean, this would lead to more transformative changes than just technological fixes. But generally, I think there is a tendency that funding bodies rather support more incremental research also, that are less skeptical about systemic issues. This might indeed be the case. With regard to our research project, we did not receive any specific funding for this. So that's, of course, always the easiest to do research if you have the capacity and to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Alan, I think in Klimakultur, we have learned really well that our most important work is also the work that's hardest to get the funding for, especially from Norway. I'd like to thank all three of you for taking the time. We will, of course, link to your article here, and it's a short article, and I can read it without any problems, so I think many other people can do as well, for us non-educated amongst us.
That's a great compliment. That's exactly how it should be.
So would you like to finish off by saying what findings in the report would you like to dive deeper into, quite shortly here in the end, in the future, if you had the chance? What do we need to learn more about?
From my point of view, I would like to get a better understanding with regard to the solutions, like what could be, because I mean, we discuss potential solutions, how to address these discourses, which are barriers for the transformation of the elite sport system. But I think there are more studies needed that look into potential solutions.
As a sociologist, I think I have to answer on the systemic level. For me, I think it would be, or for me, the next steps would need to be to understand better how we can resolve or dissolve the systemic or institutionalized pressures in the sports system, and to find ways on how from or across all levels in the system we can start to find more transformative sustainability measures. I think that's for me the next step.
Thank you so much. I'd like to close off by telling we have a huge Norwegian bicycle race called Arctic Race. And last year they were nominated from the International Bicycle Association for a climate award. And they were nominated because all the cars supporting the race are electric cars. And we found that very funny because every car is marked with a huge Equinor logo, because Equinor is the main sponsor of the Arctic Race. So yeah, that's a concrete example of how the big international sports associations and the climate awards are upholding this. So thank you very much, and looking forward to see what kind of research you're doing in the future, and looking forward to reading it. And bye-bye.
Thanks a lot for having us. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.